Welcome to the Along the Gravel Road podcast. I'm your host, Chelsea Barona. Today's guest is Juniper Cassaway, and we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about their journey. We're going to really dig into some challenging things, but also some really beautiful things. So I'm really excited to get started. Juniper is a Black, fat, autistic, non-binary trans individual from Houston, Texas, currently residing here in Baton Rouge. Juniper is a poet, playwright, small business owner, and American Sign Language interpreter. As someone who is neurodivergent, genderqueer, and living with multiple mental illnesses, there are many aspects of life that are challenging. But having found their own path amongst all of these struggles, Juniper is determined to continue to advocate for marginalized communities. Like I said, really excited to jump in here today. So thank you all for joining us. Are you looking to start your own podcast or elevate your current one? Look no further than Ray Media Group. Their team specializes in portable podcasting, which we're using today, making it easy for you to record and share your content on the go. The 3-camera setup will elevate your videos to the next level. They always say they're in the business of building relationships, and I know that's been the case for us here at Along the Gravel Road. They also offer services for weddings, short-form content creation, business promotionals, and YouTube channels. They kind of do it all, y'all. With their expertise and high-quality equipment, your message will be heard loud and clear. Contact Ray Media Group today to take your content to the next level. You can reach them at 225-772-7504 or email Ken at ken@raymediagroup, that's RHEA.com. Like I said, great team here. So hello, Juniper. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. So you reached out on Instagram, which is really exciting. And I'm really looking forward to giving you the space to be able to share your story. And we're going to get into a lot of cool topics. We're going to talk about a lot of different things today. So let's just jump right in and start with you just kind of sharing a little bit about your story and what are some of the things that you want to share here today.
Yeah, well, a little bit about me is that I grew up, I was originally born in North Carolina in Winston-Salem, and then when I was 8, we moved to Houston, and a lot that will contextualize some of my experiences was that I was raised in a conservative Christian household. I was homeschooled K through 12, and I did like dual credit during college, or during high school, so that when I went to college, I had some credits already. So it was an interesting, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Closed, just kind of closed off, and it definitely shaped my experiences, my worldview at the time growing up. Some of what kind of wasn't expected was struggling and having mental health issues. I still am not super aware if any of my family has any. I'm sure they do, but none of who I know of in our immediate or a little bit extended family have pursued or are open about having pursued help in that. So I was a really kind of shy kid growing up. I don't know how much of that was influenced just by my environment or how much of that was my personality, but I was very emotional, and my mom was this very hard woman from Atlanta and did not have a lot of time or patience to understand why I was so emotional. And as I grew up, especially moving to Houston, I was really lonely. And something my mom would always say was just oh, show yourself friendly and you'll have friends. But so much of that was I am. I'm not trying to make friends. And looking back at it now that I know I'm autistic, that was also part of, I think there were just a lot of things about me that were not socially accepted or was hard to understand. So it was kind of hard for me to make connections. However, I thought I was doing my best, and I was to make those connections. But I think that also kind of drove more of a wedge in that divide between my mother and I, understanding each other. And so when we moved to Texas and I was 8, I spent a whole year crying every day was crying, often in my closet. And as that continued on, that's when I was like kind of realizing, oh, okay, like I'm depressed. Like this, whether I was experiencing that or not before 8, I'm not sure, but like that episode of moving.
And at the time, did you have the words to say I'm depressed, or was it?
Absolutely not.
Gotcha.
Absolutely not. My mom was also one of those people who was like, even for regular things like a headache, was like, no medicine. Like, and so she, even if there were like things going on, I don't think she would have been quick to recommend any type of help for it. And so the point where I realized I was depressed was actually when I was, I was 17. I was writing a play, and I got like this direct download like overnight, and I just wrote out this play, and it was about depression. And I had friends who I knew were like diagnosed and had gone on this journey. So I like asked them, I was like, is this like accurate? Because I don't know why I'm writing this and like why this happened. And they were like, yes, like thank you so much for writing something that was like so representative of my experiences, because it's not just like doom and gloom. Like there is nuance to the experience. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Like how did I, having no experience with depression, write something that people who I knew had depression like were experiencing? And so that's when I really was like, huh, that's interesting, because these are all my experiences in this play. So that's kind of when I realized. And then after the play, or like in the process of the play, I was interviewed by a local paper and all these things. And it was so funny because at that time, I was debating whether to be like open and truthful about my mental health struggles or not, based on that my mom was going to read this or see this interview that I was doing. And I was like, I just don't know how to have this conversation with her. And so I recorded it truthfully. I went home and was like, hey, just so you know, I'm pretty sure like I'm struggling with depression, and like that's kind of why I wrote this and all these things. And in a response that's typical, I think, of some parents, to be like, well, I did my best, I don't understand why, like you think this, that you can't be depressed. She had some of those moments, but something that also stuck out to me was that she said, one time I asked you, when you're sad, how do you feel? And I said, I'm really like sad, like really, really sad. And then I asked you, when you're angry, how do you feel? And I said, I just get more sad. And she said, yeah, that sounded like something a depressed person would say. And I was like, so you didn't think to like kind of look into that, or like ask me more about that, or like maybe like talk to a therapist? And that was, I think, about like 2 or 3 years prior. So I was kind of upset at her at that point, because I was like, if you as a parent are like seeing something that maybe like your kid is struggling, why not like look more into that, just because maybe your pride or your ego about your parenting? Because it's not a failure. It's not a moral failure on a parent or the person who's struggling with mental illness. It just is.
Exactly.
So yeah, at that point in that summer of 2016, I asked my parents, like, I would like to start pursuing therapy. And I did. I started with a therapist, but then I soon after like went to college, and then I kind of stopped. And so I was like trying to find a therapist there. So just a little bit of a journey.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, something that comes up a lot is this, as I'm talking to people sort of in this, probably like around your age, around my age, is talking about parents and guardians and things, and the role they played in mental health and getting help. And I look back and I'm like, I know my parents like cared, number one, absolutely. And I know they could recognize something wasn't right, but I also think they didn't have the tools either, or the information, that the learned behaviors that they were given was that even if there is something going on, you just push through, or whatever, whatever that looks like for them. It could look different for different people. And so at a certain point I had to recognize that. And now, it's interesting because I am so outspoken about this. My family has come to me with like, their personal stories and things like that, to say like they've sort of given them permission to be able to talk about it, which has been really beautiful to see. But that's the point, right? Those we feel like we don't have the permission to be able to talk about these things, or the language, or like just like when you were 8 and when I was, growing up too, I had all these symptoms of depression and anxiety, but I didn't know that was what they were. I thought that was just me, that was just who I was, and there was nothing I could do to change it. And until there is sort of that space to be able to talk about it. It's hard to do. It's hard for us. It probably was hard for our parents too. So what is that relationship with your family look like now? Has things progressed or changed?
I would say there was a lot of, especially with my mom, because she was the one who homeschooled me, so we spent a lot of time like 101 throughout the day, every day, for many, many years together. And part of like just the personality difference, kind of really was just rough. I was, again, a really emotional kid, and I had a lot of feelings. I had a lot of dreams, and she was, as some people say, like she was my first bully. Like she was the first person to be like, no, or like, no, and like very critical of my appearance, things like that. So I've always had a strained relationship with her. Things that I didn't realize until I started going to therapy that were emotionally abusive, manipulative. And as I also went to college and started being exposed to more things, realized I was queer and trans, that did not align with like her religious beliefs as well. So that also was another factor that started playing into that separation that we were experiencing. And then like my political beliefs also changed. So those things have become like points of contention for her and I, because like it's part of who I am. Like my identity has become a political topic for her. And throughout like therapy and trying to set boundaries like for the last several years, it actually came up that about a year ago now, because I was going in for gender affirmation surgery and getting top surgery, which is basically a double mastectomy. I was explaining that to my mother and all these things, and she said some very hurtful things about that it was like mutilative and like, are you an alien? Like all these types of things. And at that point, I had been considering this over like 2 to 3 years with 2 different therapists, but I went no contact with her. I had a conversation with her about like, hey, these are some of the boundaries we've had in our conversations you have not respected. The things you said specifically about top surgery were really hurtful, and I cannot have that negativity. It is literally research proven to like negative thoughts and words in a recovery process like affect your physical healing. So I was like, I don't want that going into that, and and here is my boundary on that. Like I do not want contact with you. She's struggled with that, and I think at the time of that conversation, she for sure was her version of begging, which was not a lot, but I could tell she was seeing her like control of the situation slip away.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I appreciate that you're trying to make compromises and concessions now, but that's not where I'm at. I'm very proud of myself for that conversation, because she did not really even admit or apologize for the things she had just said that week. And I was like, cool. I started the conversation being like, why did I even give her this space? But I was very proud of myself, and I have felt like tremendously better since I have not had to like worry about what am I going to talk to her about. Oh, I have to make this call on Mother's Day, and like I even felt more peace on Mother's Day instead of a lot of resentment for seeing a lot of people having great relationships with their moms. I've struggled with that day a lot. And this past year, I was really able to look at everybody's posts with joy. And I don't know how that even works, because I was like, wow, I'm even more like specifically created this boundary with my mother, but it gave me freedom to accept that my relationship with my mom is not there. And while I am grieving that, I don't have to take that out on other people's relationships and my view of other people's relationships with their mom. So,
wow, that's big. That's really big. That had to be incredibly difficult, but also it sounds like very necessary in order for you to continue to move forward and find this joy. And because that's obviously that's something you've been living with this your entire life. And to even have that conversation, that's amazing. That definitely takes bravery and strength. And it sounds like you had the right support systems too in place to help you have that conversation and, get to a place where you were able to set those boundaries with her. So what is that? Can you tell us more about what that looks like? You mentioned a couple of therapists. What else, how did that work? What was therapy like for you? And, were there other ways that you reached out to for support or help along the way?
Yes. So my therapist while I was in college was an amazing beginning of a long relationship with her. So I was with her for 3 years and pretty much weekly until my last year of college. And it was great because she was also a Black therapist, Black woman, and I was able to bounce a lot of experiences of Black households not believing sometimes in therapy or believing you and your mental health story or that you're struggling. And a lot of Black households are also religious, highly religious. So she was able to identify with that and help me through that.
Hey y'all, Brandon Barker here with Barker Property Management and Commercial Real Estate. We use our knowledge and experience to offer a comprehensive plan and provide property management and commercial brokerage services across Louisiana. Our business was founded on the value of being responsive to our customers and protecting our clients' assets. We proudly support the You on a Loan project and the Long Gravel Road podcast.
And kind of led me to a lot of struggles that I was having interpersonally, personally, with my parents and things in school. As I transitioned out of school about a year or two afterwards, I moved to Baton Rouge. I met my partner and they live here. And so I moved here and I was like, okay, immediately I have to get another therapist because I was like, if I get there and I'm already not set up with one, I know I'm going to be struggling. So I looked on a website and because I really was getting at a point where I was into more of my queer and trans identity and I was not struggling, but identifying and deepening my connection with myself and my understanding of myself. And the therapist I had in school or back in Texas was not as familiar with terms and things like that. So I was doing more educating to her than she was able to help me. So it was also kind of a natural progression to another therapist at this point. And so now my therapist is also trans. And it's funny because I'm like, well, I can't find both. I can't find a queer or trans therapist who's also Black. Like I was really trying to find that. But this era of therapy for me has been extremely helpful, and just the person that they are is also just so identifies and mirrors my experience of who I know myself to be. And I never have to question how my therapist feels about me, which is very interesting because I know some people, there's a rhetoric of oh, I hope my therapist thinks I'm cool.
Oh, yeah.
But they're always saying such affirming things to me of I am so proud of the person that you've become and who I've seen you grow into. I have your back, things that are just so good to hear. So they have been a really solid force in the last 2 years that I've been in Baton Rouge to be on that journey. And then of course, my best friends, my friends they were the first people to be yeah, after I started getting out of my parents' household, we're yeah, that's a little questionable. Not everybody says that to their kid. So that's when I was huh, interesting. And they've been really just absolutely amazing and instrumental in my growth and in my healing because everything I said, they believed me and they were able to help me identify where things were. Of course, we're all not perfect. They have their own experiences with their parents, but there were some glaring moments that they were maybe not.
Yeah.
And then in the last few years, also my partner, Andy, he's been really great about seeing and vocalizing, like, I may not understand because I have not been present for all of your journey or even known you as long as your friends have through that journey with your parents. But like, I see how it affects you. I see, like, when you're on the phone with your dad and you're chilling and you're talking and then your mom hops on and you like tense up and you're closed off. Like, it's funny because I noticed I do that, but like him vocalizing that has been like, oh, okay, yeah, like I do. And that also helped me identify I don't want to keep putting myself in that position, knowing it hasn't changed in the last few years. So they've been really helpful in supporting me through this process of going no contact with my mom, navigating, also still being in contact with my dad. And they are still married and together. I know a lot of people are like, it's giving two different households. Like,
It is. Yeah.
And yeah, I would say for sure Andy's been instrumental in the recent support of being like a life partner as well, and seeing me go through that every day. He and my best friend were actually there the day I moved all of my things out of my parents' house. The year after college. It was an emotional day. Especially out of my bedroom that I cried many times in. Like, thankfully, my best friend is also in school to be a therapist and had a lot of really helpful grounding techniques and like thanking the space, putting those feelings like into a metaphorical jar and like leaving them here. And that was interesting because Andy was reflecting and was like, yeah, I was like, I obviously cannot help in this situation because I don't know as much as my best friend did at the time. But he was like, yeah, just seeing them walk through that with you, with that care and that kindness, and seeing how much you were affected, but how that much that helped you. Because also, like, that room, I had a suicide attempt in. Like, it was a lot. Like, there was a lot of things in that house that were not great things to reflect upon. And so definitely those support systems of my friends, my partner, and my therapist have helped me through the transition of like leaving my parents' house, something I've prayed for for a long time, into adulthood has been really cool and a journey.
Absolutely. Well, that's really special to have those people and to have, people like that who can so like in such a unique way recognize these things about you and help you sort of walk through that. That's a hard thing to find people you connect to in that way. And so it sounds like that was incredibly impactful for you. And, I'm glad you were able to find these people and continue your journey with these people. That's really important. And also the way you've been able to find therapists and that you really can relate to and that you feel comfortable with. That's not everybody's journey, Was that difficult? Was that a process, or did you just kind of find these people in the first shot?
The first little part was the process. That summer that I expressed to my parents, like, hey, I think I'm depressed and I would like some help. My mother found this clinic and there were some people there. I went through a couple of therapists. My first therapist was great and she walked me through the questionnaire and all these things and helped me identify those things. Our schedules didn't align going forward, so I had to change to somebody else. After our first session, I was like, absolutely not, because she was very much because I was like, yeah, I'm doing this, got a full scholarship to school, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, so why are you depressed? And I was like, oh, interesting. So I was like, I just got to get through this 50 minutes and I will never have to see her again. It's going to be okay. So it was that was shocking to me. But now I realize it too, it's just so representative of a lot of people's experiences because, again, with the stigmas around the mental health, it's not always that yes, I look visibly sad or something all day. So yes, I'm able to do these things, or yes, I'm quote unquote successful, or I was able to go to school and all these things, but that doesn't mean I don't still have
that's going close. Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's specific. That's why I asked, because for a lot of people, that can be the stopping point, or they stick with this therapist who obviously is not not helpful. You know, and how terrible would that be if you would have stuck that out just to hear that over and over again? Oh, that sounds great. Why are you here? You know, like that would have been detrimental to your growth and your healing in this process. And I think to say it's okay to say this isn't the right person for me and keep looking. And so after that, it sounds like you did that. That was it for then. And then what was the next step? Did you end up finding the right person after that, or did it take a little while?
I had someone else at that same clinic. I was like, ooh, they're going to be sick of me. I was like, maybe not. But I did find a therapist there. We only had a few sessions over that summer because, again, I went to school right after that. And I was like, I wish it hadn't taken a few tries so that we could have had a little more time together. But she was helpful. And then I went a few more sessions coming back on holiday break. And then that's when I kind of transitioned to the city I was in school. And I was like, okay, I need a therapist here ongoing. And that's interesting because I had a recommendation from a friend for a therapist set up. And then my mother calls one day and is like, okay, well, I found you a therapist. And I think her mission was to always put me in like Christian therapy spaces. So it was interesting because I was like, okay, well, I can try that therapist that you have found next week because I have a session this week with this other person that I have done research and found.
Yeah.
But she was like, no, I already scheduled you one for tomorrow. And I was like, okay, well, then I guess I'll go to both. And she was like, well, I'm not going to pay for you to go to 2 therapists in 1 week. And I was like, okay, then I guess I'm going to the one you. But thankfully, like, she was the person, the one I had for a long time, and she was very reflective of like, yeah, I will talk about God as much as you talk about God.
Right.
Like I will reflect that back to you for how much of involvement you want that to be. And it's funny because my therapist told me later that after my mom kind of forced me to come out to her, my mom actually called my therapist and was like, did you know this? Like, did they tell you? Blah, blah, blah. And obviously they can't tell that.
Of course not. Of course not. So it sounds like your mom really, I mean, that was control, right? That was still her way of trying to find that control in whatever way. But, oh, wow.
I just think it's great that it worked out, though, like in my relationship with my therapist. It not necessarily backfired, but it was interesting. I think the pointed therapy that my mother wanted me to have.
Right, exactly.
That was great.
Small wins. Okay, great. So that actually kind of leads us into the next topic that I know you wanted to discuss. And so this idea of religious trauma, it actually has come up a lot in some of these conversations that I have with people about their mental health journeys in different ways. Can you talk about what that means for you, what that's looked like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up a little bit Southern Baptist in North Carolina. And then once we got to Texas, we were more like non-denominational Christian. Yeah. And I think something that did save me, honestly, in those times growing up, realizing I was different, realizing I was depressed, realizing I had anxiety, like all these things, was being active in my church. At that time, they were borderline a mega church, and they are definitely now. But so it was kind of easy to get lost in feeling like I don't belong. So I wasn't really active like in my age group. As soon as I like graduated from 5th grade, I went back and started volunteering. Because I just wanted to pour into those younger people, because I knew like I needed someone like closer to my age when I was that age, like to identify with and to be like, wow, because sometimes you just feel like, yeah, adults don't understand me at that age. And I also was in a point where I was like, I was 13 and going to the women's class, like, and it's funny because I think back and I'm like, they were so gracious to let me out there but I was just wanting more. Like I was not really identifying with the clickiness and the things that were going on with the peers and youth group. And of course, like looking back at it now, I was like, yeah, that was also a very autistic experience for me.
Yeah, definitely.
And then like we had 3 church services. So I would spend one volunteering, one going to women's class, and then one going in quote unquote big church. I would never go to like youth group. So like I really had a very mature like spiritual stance growing up. Like adults would always like compliment me. You're so mature. You're so spiritually mature. Blah, blah, blah. Like you're wise beyond your years. All these things. But it's also that conundrum of I shouldn't have had to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, yes, thank you. I guess that I am holding these things so well, but they don't know what I'm holding. And it was a point like my parents were big into the church, or big at the church, so it was kind of like I didn't feel comfortable sharing with people because they probably wouldn't believe me, or they would be like, "Oh, but your parents are so nice and they're so God loving and like all these things." But it was definitely a different like facade at church than kind of how I felt with my relationship with my mom at home. But it was also funny because I felt like I was living a double life because there were years we went to this church, and in high school, like when I was starting to do like college things, so my parents were talking about me, people would be like, "Oh, that's your kid?" Like, yeah, they're always serving, they're doing all those things. Like, I didn't know, but they knew my parents as this, they knew me as this within the church. But it's funny, we had our own individual functionings, but it's interesting to me that my parents never really talked about me. And that was interesting to think about. But of course, like when I started having these things in my attempts, then they were all talking about me because in the sense of like, oh, we need to pray for Juniper and like all these things. So as I went to college, I kind of was like, especially realizing I'm queer. That's when I really started, because the messaging from my parents and from the church I was growing up in was that being gay was a sin and being queer was like not right in the eyes of the Lord. And I struggled with that, of course, because my relationship with God was so integral to who I was growing up. Like listening to worship music, like singing is how I survived a lot of like loneliness in my room. And I was like, suddenly, like, I find myself being like, okay, this is part of my identity. Like, but how? If God creates everything to be good, like, how am I not good? And that journey kind of took me not necessarily away from the church, but I came into a spot where I was like, okay, I'm a queer Christian. Like, this is like being a queer, being a Christian is not mutually exclusive. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to be that for a while because I was like, I know that people have done a lot of like, there are queer theologians who have done more work than the average Christian to really dissect the original text and language of the Bible and to kind of disprove like those, what they call the clobber passages for queer people, that are like, yes, like this means you can't be gay.
Right.
When so much of it was like, no, it was like, man shall not lie with a boy, so like don't be a pedophile. Like,
yeah, right.
So I did a lot of affirming myself at that time of like, I don't have to be the one proving my worth. Like, I don't have to prove that I can be a Christian and queer. Like, and that really was instrumental. But also just overall, the struggle to be seen as a queer Christian in a broad Christian space was very tiring. And I just got to a point where I was like, just so much, even if I'm trying to convey, like, this is my story, this is like how I still am a Christian and identifying as queer, like there just was still so much backlash and hate. And that's when I started really separating myself from like identifying as a Christian. I still believe in God, and I still feel like I have a relationship, but I've also just expanded my spirituality to include other things, and changed the narrative for myself of like, just hearing all growing up, like, we're sinners, you're a sinner. Like, for you to deserve or earn like this or blessings or God's love, like, you have to be this sort of way. Whereas now, like, I feel like I know I'm intrinsically worthy and that the universe and God wants to bless me, like, and I just have to be myself. And that kind of really has been healing in that sector, because I struggled a lot. Like, that was such a big part of my identity growing up, being in church. There's still points, and Andy doesn't understand this, but I will listen to worship music still because it's just nostalgic for me. It's healing for my soul. Like, I might not even necessarily believe all the lyrics the same way I did, but like, it's still something. I was listening to it all the way here. Like, I just comforting for me to also know, like, I don't know, people are gifted musically, whether they're like in the quote unquote secular sphere or Christian artists. So I was like, music in general saved me as part of my upbringing. So I was like, yeah, I connect with that still.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that. And to get to a place where, just sort of accepting and telling yourself it's okay, like that your experience, the way you experience this religion or spirituality now doesn't look like, whatever it's supposed to look like, and to get to a place where that's okay. And now, it sounds like really throughout your journey, you've really found this sort of beautiful place of finding out who you are, and without needing to the rest of the world to tell you that or necessarily understand that, because as you said, a lot of people probably won't, but you found a really strong group of people around you that have, and that's a really special place to be in. And I can't imagine that this journey has been easy for you in a lot of ways. However, even just looking at your social media and your Instagram, it's like you just radiate this light and this love. How did you get to that place? And I think you kind of shared a little bit about that, but how did you get there? And then what would you say to someone who is still very much struggling, who is, facing a lot of this world that, like you said, is determined to misunderstand them and you? And what would you say to people really still very much in it and not on the other side of it, or not in their healing journey even?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is definitely I'm still in it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Especially like in that part of the world that's determined to misunderstand you, because there's so much, again, like of my identity that has become politicized. So many anti-trans bills that have gone out this year, over 435 across all the states. And there are so many times where it's so just like I feel so despondent about existing, even like current situations with people, environments, career. Like I'm just making so many changes now, like based on how people are treating me, because I feel like what has really gotten me, to go back to your question, gotten me to this point has been evaluating like what do I want to do with this like one precious life like that I have. Who do I want to surround myself with? What do I want to feel like day to day? And that has been instrumental in like other like relationships, friendships, and then including my family. Like those are things that when I'm reflecting upon it, like I don't want to, if I can help it, like feel discriminated against because I'm Black, or feel discriminated against because I'm trans. Like I don't want to be in environments that are condoning that. And for like me personally going like through my mental health challenge with that and healing from these experiences that I still experience on the daily, like taking it to therapy. Like I just still take it to the therapy all the time. I still make notes throughout the week. I'm like, oh, I gotta talk to Megan about this. I'm not gonna lie, like there's definitely been points where I've recognized though, like ways that I have taken things from therapy and used that in my daily life. I remember like a few years ago, I had a conscious thought where I was like, wow, I got bad news, or like a plan was canceled, or like things. That was another thing. Sorry, side note. Plans being canceled had such a detrimental effect on me growing up and all the way till college that I was like, why am I struggling with this? One, because I was autistic and that was a change of plans. Like that was something I was like, oh my gosh, like this is why it means so much to me. But two, recognizing like that also playing into my depression, like it would go from like, oh, this messed up my day and like I'm not feeling good about this in my body, to also like, okay, now I'm spiraling and I'm having all these black and white thoughts and like, it's not going great. So learning those tools in therapy also helped me process like changes and things that, as my neurodivergencies, like working with that, has played a huge part in it as well. So like now I've come to a point where I recognize, okay, I get information that is like unsettling to me, but what do I do with it now? And it's been to a point where it's like, yeah, I allow myself to be upset for a while and for however like long my body needs, because personally I don't feel like putting a cap or a limit on like you feeling grief or feeling sadness is like helpful for me anyway. So I feel that in the intervals I need to, and I also have my go-to, like, what do I need right now? Like, asking myself, what do I need right now? Which is something like my therapist has reflected for me and modeled for me of like, what are you going to do to take care of yourself today? What are you going to do to take care of yourself this week? Like, knowing I have something big or something going up. So doing that also, like, giving myself the nurturing that I need. There's an account I follow on Instagram called The Mother Wound, and that was something that also helped me in reparenting myself type of thing. Recognizing that it's important and it's detrimental, like, to not have a great relationship, like, with your mom, if you're privileged to have a mom who is alive and in your life. And it's unfortunate because I'm like, I know there's so many other circumstances where people don't have a mother in their life, and I'm like, why can't I make mine work? So, like, that also has helped me, like, understanding that I cannot control anybody else. I can only control my reactions to things, and has helped me let go of some of the hurt, a lot of the hurt that was tied to a lot of the depression I was experiencing growing up. It's not that I don't struggle sometimes thinking about how much I miss, like, having someone to go to or be like someone who's excited or who would support me in something. But I am taking, again, the priority for me is caring for myself. My motto is I'm the only one who has to live with myself for the rest of my life. So I want to make decisions and have people in my life who affirm.
I like that a lot. And I'm also glad you started with that. You're still very much in it, because absolutely, I think that's something that I hope when people are sort of telling this story in a way where it's, this happened, I got this help, and then here I am today. It can look very much like, oh, that was easy. That was a quick fix, but not in any way. We're all very much still going through this. And, that especially for you, you're up against a lot of this hate in this world. And so, using those tools to be able to get through it in situations you should never have to face, and none of this stuff should be happening to you. But to recognize that obviously you're still struggling every single day, but these are the ways that you're getting through it. I appreciate you mentioning that and sort of reaffirming that for people who might be listening, saying, "Oh, but I tried that, or I did this, and I'm still struggling." Absolutely, it's a never-ending sort of journey of finding the safe spaces to be able to give you the tools to continue navigating life in general. And so this may look a little bit similar to some of the things you just shared with us, because there were a lot of ways that I think people can take away to help them cope with things that you just shared. But if there was one thing that you would want people to take away from this conversation, what would that be?
This might be two. So
it doesn't have to be just one. It could be three. But yeah.
Love yourself and strive to understand yourself as much as possible, and surround yourself with people who love, accept, and understand and respect you. That has been absolutely key, like, in my life with my friendships, in my relationship with my partner. Like, we are definitely a neurodivergent and mentally ill household. And giving ourselves grace to be like, yeah, our house is super messy. And that's because we're both either going through something, or like we both have our times where I'm going through something, he's going through something, I'm supporting him, he's supporting me. Like, there's just so many things that we've learned as people, and I've learned as a person, to give myself that grace and to give other people that grace. And if there is somebody or multiple people in your life and in your circle who are able to support you, who are able to love you through, not love you despite, but love you because. And that is something that has been like, oh, so awesome. It's like, no, I don't love you despite your autism, or despite your queerness, or despite your mental illness. Like, I love you because all of that is intrinsic to who you are. Something that sometimes gets on my nerves is when people are like, yeah, like, autism is your superpower, and like, mental illness, like, made you the person you are today. Like, yes, but it's not a positive or a negative. Like, it just is. Like, I'm autistic. That is just a fact. I am Black. Like, that is just a fact. I am fat. Like, that is just a fact. It is not positive or negative. I have depression, and that is a fact. Like, it's not like, oh, that is something that was so great that happened to me and it made me a better person, or like, it's so detrimental to me that I can't like imagine, or I wish I didn't have it. It just is. And coming to terms with that like that's part of like the body neutrality movement as well, has influenced me thinking more neutrally about a lot of aspects of my life, because that's not these quote unquote like labels are not the most interesting thing about me. I am the most interesting thing about me. And knowing yourself is really what has saved me. So I would say that was one thing I would want people to take away, is know and love yourself, because you unequivocally knowing who you are, you know yourself the best. Doctors can't tell you any different. Partners can't tell you any different. Like, friendships can't tell you any different. Your parents can't tell you any different. You know who you are. And that has been my most important takeaway. And as I'm continuing, of course, on this journey, is like being true to who I am and knowing and loving myself. And as Elwood says, never go that of style.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I am now, grateful to know a little bit about you. And I think it's been really special for you to share this space with me today. Thank you.